Welcome all. We'll go ahead and convene the City of Beaverton Budget Committee today, November 15th, 2021 at exactly 6 p.m. to discuss Supplemental Budget S22-1. Susan or Patrick, could either of you please call the roll for Budget Committee members?
Yes, this is Susan Cole. I will do so. Councillor Fagan. He will be late, I believe. Councillor Hartmeyer-Brigg.
Here.
Councillor Hassan.
Here.
Councillor Mitchell.
Here.
Councillor Sansusi.
Here.
Councillor Tivnan. Member Burton.
Here.
Member Duggar.
Here.
Member Huang.
Present.
Member Kamath.
Here.
Member Maldonado let us know that he will not be attending. Member Zatzmary. And Mayor Beatty.
Here.
Thank you, Susan. Welcome to all members, councilors, staff, and especially members of the public who have joined us this evening. Special note from your chair, as we go through the budget, if you'd like to speak, please use the raise hand function. That'll make it a lot cleaner. Or if you prefer, type your name into the chat and I'll do my best to call on you in the order that I see. A couple special introductions to our newest members. I don't know if you guys want to introduce yourself, Councillor Hartmeyer-Brigg, and then City Manager Jenny Hariyama. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
You guys want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. I am Ashley Hartmeyer-Brigg. I am new to the City Council as of October 5th when I was sworn in, and I'm excited to serve on Budget Committee with you all.
And I'm Jenny Hariyama, new city manager, 2.5 months in, and still swimming. So thank you.
Thank you both and welcome. You joined a rowdy group. We're excited to have you.
And Mr. Chair, it might be helpful for some of the both Councilor Hartmeyer-Brigg and City Manager Jenny Haramara have already know the City Council members, but the City Council, the new Jenny and Ashley do not know the other lay members of the Budget Committee. So if I'm just going to go through my listing, if we can go with Hui Huang. Hui, if you wanted to introduce yourself to both Jenny and Councilor Hartmeyer-Brigg.
Yes. Hi. Good evening, everybody, and hello. My name is Hui. I am an assistant professor at Pacific University School of Pharmacy. Active in the community pharmacy space here, and it's just good to be here and welcome aboard. I feel like I'm still swimming too, so don't
I know.
feel like, you know.
Thank you, Hui. Let's go next to Tiffany Burton.
Hi, nice to meet you both. Hope you guys are enjoying it. I've been on the Budget Committee for 3 years. This is actually going to be my last meeting tonight. But yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
And let's go to Member Kamath.
Hi, my name is Renu Kamath, and this is my second year on the Budget Committee, and welcome to both of you.
And I'm looking through the list to see if any other of the lay members are on. I know that counts that Mr. Satzmary is trying to log on. I see a couple of chats from him.
Yeah, for the record, I believe Dave and now Councillor Tivnan have been promoted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Zatzmary, if you could unmute yourself and maybe give an introduction to, you know most of the Budget Committee members and the City Council, but we do have a new City Councilor, Ashley Hartmeyer-Brigg, and our new City Manager, Jenny Hariyama.
Sure, I'm Dave Zatzmary. I moved to Beaverton about 5 years ago, actually, to be with my grandkids. So I'm taking care of them part-time. And previously, for 30 years, I was a vice provost at the University of Washington with a lot of budget responsibility.
And then last, I don't see if I can see if there's any other citizen members of the Budget Committee that have logged on. Can you confirm that, Susan, other than whom we've heard from already?
Correct.
Okay. All right. With that, Mr. Chair, I think on the Budget Committee, next item on the agenda is a motion to approve the Budget Committee meetings of May 20th, 24th, and 27th, 2021. So if we could have a motion and then a second and then discussion.
Sure. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Counselor.
So
Is
it
there
looks like it was
any-
moved. So just for the record, it
Go
looks
ahead.
like it was moved by Councilor Mitchell, seconded by Councilor Hassan.
Is there any discussion? I will pull up my list so I can see hands. Seeing none. Let's go for a vote. What's the best way to vote, Patrick?
And Mr. Digger, I do believe that Councilor Fagan did notice that in one of the minutes, it did not record the mayor's position as being a voting member of the city council, and the record didn't show that vote. And so he suggested that would be corrected, and Joanne Harrington has already corrected those minutes to reflect the correct voting number for the city council members to include the mayor. It's one of those things that's, going to a new form of government where the mayor did not vote on any issues before the budget committee or the city council, but now under the new charter, the mayor's position does.
Makes perfect sense. And lucky that he caught that. Thank you, Mr. O'Clair. So all in favor, how do we want to do this? Do we just,
It's usually a roll
is
call
it a
vote.
voice? Okay.
Yeah, a roll call vote so that we can get the record straight.
Okay. Susan,
So
do you want to
Susan?
call the roll? Yeah.
Yes. Counselor Hartmeyer Prig,
Abstain.
Counselor Hassan,
Yes.
Counselor Mitchell,
Yes.
Counselor Sansucci,
Yes.
Counselor Tivnon,
Yes.
Member Burton,
Yes.
Member Duggar,
Yes.
Member Huang,
Yes.
Member Kemmeth,
Yes.
Member Zatzmary,
Yes.
Mayor Beatty,
Yes.
Is that everyone?
yes, sorry.
Looks like it passes.
And
So-
Susan, just further, could you just say that the number that passed and one abstention?
Oh, sure. 12 pass and 1 abstention.
Thank you.
And also I have a quick question. I have a Mark O in the attendee. Could that be Mark Fagan? Okay. And then I also have a phone number 503-713-9169. Does anyone recognize that phone number? It might be a member of the public. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I make a suggestion that if there are members of the public that would like to speak at the budget committee meeting, and this might be a good time to let them address the full budget committee meeting to see if there is, so if you would just call, if there's anyone from the public that would wish to speak to the budget committee concerning tonight's agenda or items.
I think thank you. That's a great suggestion. Is there any member of the public, and I don't know if they have the raise hand function, but certainly just speak out and we can call, but of the public that would like to address the Beaverton Budget Committee before we go through our motions? Going once. Okay. Looks like at this point, we will turn it over to our new city manager, Jenny
All right, well,
Hariyama.
Thank you very much. If we could have the slides up, I'll go ahead and get us started.
One moment.
All right, well, thank you. Well, good evening, Chair, members of the Budget Committee. I'm pleased to introduce the 21-22 Supplemental Budget. I just wanted to set the table for tonight's discussion. If we can go to the next slide. We'll take the opportunity to present a little bit about the adopted budget, let you know where we started and where we're at right now, including drivers of what has caused our general fund shortfall. And then, of course, going over how that's impacted our current fund balance. But the main focus for tonight's presentation, of course, is the supplemental budget, which is really an opportunity to check in on the status of how we're doing 5 months in, and then provide the committee updates in terms of things ranging from carryovers from last year to transfers to recommended new items. And Patrick O'Clair will discuss those in detail as we get into tonight's discussion. And then we'd like to close to tell you a little bit about what's on the horizon for the 22-23 budget development process. That can include revenue trends as well as costs that we see coming up over the next year. And those will be significant. Many of them can be uncontrollable costs. And then, of course, how do those affect our fund balance outlook? And then, of course, we want to allow you to ask any questions that you have with respect to the supplemental budget that's before you this evening. So with that, I'll turn tonight's presentation over to Patrick O'Clair, our Finance Director, and Susan Cole, our Assistant Finance Director. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, very much. First of all, I'd also like to acknowledge that it was late. I just sent out the responses to Councillor Sansuzi's questions that he had raised during his review of the budget. And Councillor Sansuzi raised quite a number of good questions about Oregon budget law and our reserves and contingency, use of contingencies, and what's a legal level of appropriation. And that's going to be something that we as a city council and the new city administration or city manager need to kind of work through. Under the previous two mayors, both Mayor Drake and Mayor Doyle, there are certain legal level of appropriations that is prescribed by budget law. And Oregon budget law says that we need to have appropriations and some very broad categories of expenditures. And they are personnel services, materials and services, capital outlay, debt service, transfers, and contingency and reserves. And for all funds of this city, other than the general fund, that legal level of appropriation is at the fund level. So let's just choose the water fund, for example. And in the water fund, we have many programs. We have finance for utility billing, engineering. We have public works, water distribution, and public works, water quality, and then water general services. So even though there are 5 programs, and each one of those programs has personal services, budgetary appropriations, the minimum legal level of appropriation is at the fund level. So if you were to take all of the personal services for all those 5 programs and total them up, that's the fund level appropriation, legal level of appropriation for personal services. And that goes for all categories within a particular fund's budget. Now, in practicality, we actually hold administratively down to the program level. So within the program like utility billing, we like to hold the personal services at the program level and not necessarily at the fund level. Now, that's the fund level is the legal minimum requirements of the Oregon budget law, and that's how we administer the fund. But internally, we keep everything at the program level, and so that is consistent for all funds within the city, except for one fund, and that's the general fund. And the general fund is specific, and this has been set up since before my time here at the city of Beaverton as to how the city council wanted that fund set up. And that fund is set up at not only the fund level, but the department within the fund is now the legal level of appropriation. So it's a little bit one granular area different from all the other funds of the city. And then for practicality purposes, again, in the general fund, I'll choose the finance department. The finance department has 3 programs: administration, purchasing, and finance operations. And at the legal level of appropriation at the department level, you would combine all 3 of those programs, personal services, and that's the legal level of appropriation from the Oregon budget law minimum standards. But again, Beaverton takes it to a little bit lower level of appropriation. We try to keep balanced within the program's personal services and the program's materials and services. So that's kind of a brief background of our legal level of appropriation that we have established for the city. And then under the mayor form of government, the the mayors wanted to bring every transaction that affects the budget forward to the budget committee for approval. That's not required by Oregon budget law. Oregon budget law allows a lot of that administrative work to be done at the council level, and some of it can be at the administration level, depending on if the city council would allow the city manager now to enact changes. And so that this budget here that we have tonight before us, it's large, it's very complex, it's a lot of numbers, but it's what we have operated past since we have been under a mayor form of government. And now we'll have an opportunity to maybe take a look at that going forward. And I've recommended in the response to Councilor Sansouzi's questions that this would be something that we'd bring forward in one or a series of work sessions with the council as how do you want us to now operate under a council manager form of government versus how we have been operating under the mayor form of government. So as an example, this whole supplemental budget would not necessarily need to be presented to a budget committee. It could be all handled administratively at administration level for some things, at the city manager level, and then council for additional appropriations. As a general guideline, when we have any particular fund, be it the general fund or water, sewer, or storm, if we need to take money out of a contingency account, that can only be done at the city council action. So in the supplemental budget here, there are a lot of additional appropriation requests for funds and programs to take monies out of contingency. Now, those have to be approved by the city council. Again, that could be done administratively at a city council meeting on an administrative transfer resolution to do that. But historically, the city has always brought all of these changes in one document to the budget committee for approval. So we have a little bit of work ahead of us as to how do we want to work going in the future on how we can do things maybe a little bit more administratively at the city manager level, and then things administratively at the budget committee at the city council level. And then the budget committee would only be convened for actually adopting the budget for each year, if that's so what the council would like to choose going forward. I know that's a lot of information, and this supplemental budget that we prepared tonight doesn't take any of those things into consideration. It's using the status quo of how we've always presented the supplemental budget. And I did want to also mention one thing is that this year's supplemental budget is a little bit more detailed because of our construction programs, specifically in water. With our Wi-Fi water construction program, we have many millions of dollars of projects. And we've retooled our budget system and our accounting system to track not only at the fund level and at the program level, but at the project level. And that's where you'll see where we'll move money from one project to another project to get that project's balanced budget based upon what engineering needs to, they believe they need to complete that project for the remainder of the year. And so this budget has a little bit more detail of transactions that are very prescriptive and how we're moving money around within a program within the water construction fund or the sewer construction fund. And I know that Councilor Sansouzi asked that question that seems redundant, that we're moving money from within the same account, but to different projects, but that's how our new accounting system is really granular down to the project accounting level. And this is also from not only from the budget standpoint, but whenever a payment is made against a project, it tracks that project payment against that project budget to see how we're performing. So with that, and I know that there's going to be some other questions, but please feel free to ask me any questions going forward. And with that, let's go towards the back to the presentation, Susan, and we'll start with the first slide. So this is we just wanted to recap, since we have 2 new city councilors that were not, or at least 1 new city councilor and that was not involved in the adopted project process of adopting the budget. So when we adopted the budget for this year, it's about $441 million, and it supports these key activities that are on this front screen. And the the five main key funds that we really keep track of are the general fund, street, building, library, and water. And you'll see that continue through the theme of our budget presentation and our budget overview. And then we also support the key capital projects. Again, the biggest one is water and sewer infrastructure, mainly water for this year. Under Civic Projects, we have completion of the public safety building. This is going through tail out this budget year. The same with the City Park Fountain project, and hopefully the PRC construction project will be tailed out this year. Now, there could be some follow-up expenditures for fiscal year 22-23 that might need some additional follow-up transfer or carryover of appropriations for the PRC. But I think the public safety building and the Fountain Park construction project should be completed this year. Let's go to the next slide, Susan. So another way to take a look at the budget is where do the revenues come from? And this is the total citywide budget. So it just shows that our biggest source of revenue is our beginning working capital. Mainly it's large because of the capital programs that we are building in the water, sewer, and storm and street activities, followed by taxes and intergovernmental revenues and interfund transfers. And then we have financing activity proceeds that shows as $15 million. That's mainly for the in support of the water utility projects. We have our WIFIA loan drawdowns in that activity. We have a proposed 2022 water revenue bond. Currently, we're targeting it at about $25 million to be issued sometime in May or June of this year. Then we have two $10 million loans with the state that is going through their review process. I believe, Susan, I want to say it's going to be February now.
Yes.
Yes, that our loan applications are going to go through final review at the Infrastructure Financing Authority at the state, and hopefully we'll get those approved. If they are not approved, we would then just increase our bond issue that's currently at $25 million to pick up the additional 20 that we would have borrowed from the the State Infrastructure Financing Authority. Let's go on to the next schedule. The next one shows by fund where the money is divided up into. The single biggest fund is the city's general fund, sitting at 90 million. And then the next group of funds is our water funds, which is our operating and capital funds. So we have basically 4 funds now that make up the water enterprise. We have our operating fund. We have our water construction fund. We have our WIFIA water construction fund. And then we have our debt service fund that supports all of the water activities. And that's at 125 million. So in total, when you're taking a look at water, it's our largest one kind of enterprise, then followed by the city's general fund. Let's go on to the next slide, Susan. When we take a look at the general fund, again, it's our largest single purpose fund at 91 million. And it really is heavily property tax dependent. About 45% of our revenues come from property taxes. The next largest one is 12% in franchise fees. And you can see how it's apportioned for splitting up the general fund. The largest funding, of course, is for police, then followed by community development, city administration, and then various activities of general support, city attorney's office, municipal court, and finance and human resources. In our non-departmental department, we have basically 2 activities. We have non-departmental operations, which is about 9.5 million, and then we have the non-departmental, which has general reserves and contingencies of the general fund. And we wanted to highlight this, and it's going to be highlighted through the next slides and throughout the presentation, is we knew going into this year's budget that our reserves were low. It was a conscious decision by the budget committee to adopt the budget, but we're coming to a point where we need to make some changes or some recommendations about how to correct the city's general fund reserves going forward. to get it to on a more stable pathway. Any questions on this slide from the committee? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is our general fund shortfall. So what we call our current revenues, that's the current revenues coming in, is about 77 million. And the expenditures are about 86 million at the adopted budget. And with the supplemental budget, it's at about 90 million. So on a budgetary basis, we are kind of deficit spending to current revenues, $9 million on a budgeted basis and 12.4 million on us with the supplemental. Now, the 12.4 is a little bit misleading because in the supplemental budget request is a transfer of $1.6 million worth of bond proceeds that's housed in the general fund. And the recommendation is that would be transferred to the Patricia Research Center for the Arts Construction Project to complete that project out this year, with the idea that the debt service for that $1.6 million will now have to come from the Transient Lodging Tax Fund and no longer be a general fund requirement for repayment of the debt. If we take a look at over the last 5 years, this relationship between adopted budget revenues and the expenditures has been a delta of about deficit of about 7.1 million. And the reason that this historical average is so high is one, that the city's general fund is the biggest fund, is also the one that has the most diversified revenues within the city's operations. And it's also the biggest fund that has employees. About 66% of all employees reside in the city's general fund, about 385 FTEs. And so when we put together the budget, we budget as though every position is budgeted 100% of the time for the full year. In our revenues, we are kind of conservative in our revenues. So on a historical basis, our average is about a $7.1 million deficit. And they're comparing that now to a $9 million adopted budget and a $12 million now budget with supplemental, with the $12 million being inflated by about 1.6 million. And that's what we need to kind of take a look at going forward. How are we going to kind of correct this issue for this fiscal year through the tail of this fiscal year, and then also preparing for next year's budget. Susan, next screen. So some of the key drivers that were for the general fund is we had the COVID-19 pandemic, which reduced our revenues over a 3-year period by about, on a budgetary basis, about $4.7 million. But with our actual budget through the actuals that we received from this last fiscal year ending June 30th, it reduced it to about $3.7 million. And then there are other implications within the lodging tax fund, the building fund, and the street fund revenue losses that we had. If council and the budget committee may recall, we did use part of our American Rescue Plan Act funds to bolster some of our reductions in our revenues. We used $2 million for the general fund last fiscal year and $1 million for the building fund for last fiscal year. So Susan, next slide. Additional drivers for the budget that we adopted this year is that we had cost of living adjustments for the general fund of about $1 million. And we also had PERS rate increases that averaged about $1.5 million for each biennium, for each year of this new biennium, $1.5 million for this current year, and then we'll continue that $1.5 million PERS funding for the biennium. And one thing that that also is a very key driver is that all throughout the COVID-19 response, the city made a commitment to have no staffing reductions or furloughs. So I know that some cities actually did furloughs and some had reductions of staffing to help conserve cash. We decided to use some of our reserves to bridge us through this period of the COVID-19 response. And then in addition to not only keeping staff on fully employed and no furloughs, the city also provided additional paid COVID leave balances for employees needing to respond to family needs during the COVID pandemic. So although it wasn't a net expense, increased expense, it was, you could say it was maybe a little bit loss of a productivity because we're paying for people to be on a leave that we provided for COVID-19 reasons, and therefore we did not receive the actual work products. And so the only thing was the lost work level of within people who needed to respond and take use of the COVID-19 COVID leave, paid leave. Next slide, Susan. So let's take a look at general fund ending fund balances, and this is a chart that has 4 bars that are represent each of the last 5 fiscal years and now the new fiscal year 21-22. So on the green bar represents when we adopt a budget, what we think our contingency levels will be for the general fund. And then when we bring forward the results from the previous year's operations forward, we have an adjustment to beginning working capital, and it also adjusts the ending fund balance for the budget year that we are now bringing forward the actuals from the previous year. So you can see that there's usually an increase for 18-19. It was pretty even. The green and the blue are the same. For last year, the difference between green and blue was actually a reduction when we did the supplemental. And then when we prepare the following year's budget, we take a look at revenue trends that we're seeing in the current year budget, and departments can refine their expenditure needs for the year. And that's where we come up with the estimated, that would be the gray bar line. And then the final bar line, the brown one, is what the actual ending fund balance is for the general fund for each year. So you can see there's definitely a pattern that it's, by the time we finish up with the actual fund balance, it's a lot better in position than we had from adoption to bringing forward the supplemental to then bringing forward estimates, and then when that year is finally completed. But the concerning that we have coming into fiscal year 21-22 is the low levels. We were back at $6 million back in fiscal year 16-17, and now we're just barely over 4 million coming into fiscal year 2021 on an adopted budget, and a slightly less on the fund balance with the supplemental budget taking into consideration. And again, a big driver of that blue bar was the $1.6 million that we have now contributed from the general fund bond reserves to the Patricia Research Center for the Arts. When we prepared this year's budget, these were the funds that we knew that we needed to take a look at. Again, the general fund, it was our percentage of expenditures that we'd like to have in contingency when we adopt a budget is at 11%, and we were under by about $4 million. We needed to have we would like to have about 9.4. We had a 5.1 in adopting the budget. And this was as the budget was presented to the budget committee. At the budget committee, we did make some changes to the general fund that actually further reduced that total ending fund balance to an amount that's less than 5.1 million. That was presented to the budget committee. And then the other funds that were sensitive, again, is the building fund, the Transient Lodging Tax fund, the library fund, and the water operating fund. So we knew coming into this year that these were funds that had some constraints, and we were willing to let the reserves drop for this year to see if we could start to build them back up. And throughout the next portion of the presentation, we'll show you how funds are recovering, except for basically the general fund and the TLT fund and library fund are holding steady. So let's go to the next slide, Susan. So one of the things that the supplemental budget does is we adjust the budget for each fund based upon the preliminary audited figures from the closeout of the books as of June 30th, 2021. And so that's one of the main primary things that we bring forward in the supplemental budget. And then the next bullet items are things that are pretty standard each year. Is that what we do is we then also carry over appropriations from the prior fiscal years for purchase orders and encumbrances. These are legal commitments that the city had and budgeted for last year that did not, either the goods or services were not received by June 30th, and therefore those encumbrances and those purchase orders are then rolled forward into this fiscal year, and we bring forward the appropriation of those purchase orders and encumbrances from the prior year into the current year. Then we have personnel changes that have been previously approved by the City Council. These were items that came to the City Council from June through August that directed the finance structure to include those into the supplemental budget. And then we have unspent capital project funds and grant funding that are carried again over from last year to this year. And then there are some projects that have been approved by the City Council since the adoption of the budget that now required additional appropriations. And then there's also additional appropriations that were not included in the previously approved budget that are now being brought forward for consideration by the Budget Committee. And then the next thing we'll be doing is doing some review of prior year and current year financial information. So this is the impact that we have to the general fund balance. It's about $3.8 million. It's about 3.34 of expenditures. And normally it should be between 9 and 11%, or we should have a fund balance of between 7.8 and 9.6 million. So there are on the horizon improved revenues. So in the general fund, we have an increase of about $1 million over what we had originally provided for in the adopted budget that's being considered for the supplemental budget. It's basically in business license fees, planning and site development, and court fines. Gas taxes are increasing, and the registration fees are back on track. So we're increasing our gas tax revenues anticipated this year by about $450,000. Our water sales have increased based upon the summer that we did have, the hotter than normal summer, and the increase in irrigation that we're seeing, and plus an increase in consumption just in general for growth that we're experiencing down the South Cooper Mountain. And the biggest one is in the building fund. The building official is expecting about an additional $1.5 million worth of inspection fees this year than what was anticipated during the budget when we prepared this last March and April to see where she is thinking that we are going to be at the end of this fiscal year, increasing it by about $1.5 million. And this is based upon items that have currently come into the city for inspection fee revenues, and then what she is seeing in the pipeline going forward for development that should come in for building permits before the end of this fiscal year. So we do have some improved revenues. So some of the things that we were going to take a look at is are some of our revenue trends. This is our business licenses, and you can see the effect of COVID-19 in fiscal year 20. So we had about a $600,000 drop. I mean, $660,000 drop from prior levels of about $700,000 to $640,000 last year, 2 years ago, and then increased a bit for 2021. 2022, although it's estimated at 660, I believe that by the time we get through our business license renewal process, it should be at the 670 or even higher level. The reason I haven't adjusted that is because we're in the middle of our business license renewal period this December, coming up in about 3 weeks. That renewal process takes about 2 months to complete. So I'll have a better picture of what we think business license fees are going to look like for the city, probably about January or February of 2022. And one thing that our business license fees is really heavily centric on what we call an FTE count, So the business license revenue that we receive from business license fees is mainly from headcounts or FTEs that businesses employ. And the business license fee is $8.50 per head count. And this gives us a good indication of at least kind of an employment trend within our business community within Beaverton. And so I think that coming up into fiscal year 2022, we should see at least the equivalent of fiscal year 2021, if not a little bit better. Susan, next schedule. This is a theme that we're going to have for the next series of slides. It's taking a look at cumulative monthly revenues for some various revenue streams. And normally what you would see in hopefully in a good bell curve or a good chart like this is that the fiscal years would start out at 2018, go 2019, 2020, 2021, and then this 2022. And here it shows you that fiscal year 20 was less than fiscal year 19, and fiscal year 2020 was less than fiscal year 2019. So you can see some of the impacts of COVID-19 had on our site development planning revenues, that it kind of curtailed our development. And so we did not achieve the levels that we received in 2019. But if you take a look at July through October of 2022, you can see we have a very strong showing for the month of July and August. And the trajectory is that it's going to exceed what we had in 2019, and that's where we're prompting an increase in revenues for both site development and planning fees. The next one is Washington County Vehicle Registration Fee. This is a new fee that's been established for only 3 fiscal years, and this is fiscal year 2022 is our 4th fiscal year. And here you see also the fiscal year 2020 was below the 2019 levels. And again, that's very COVID-19 pandemic cause. And as you recall, I think the governor kind of gave a grace period for people registering their vehicle registration, kind of gave them a grace period because of DMV couldn't process the vehicle registrations. And so we see a downtick in revenues for fiscal year 20, down below what we received for fiscal year 19. And fiscal year 21 came in quite on target. And we can see that fiscal year 22 is trending right along with fiscal year 2021. And so I think that the vehicle registration fee issue was just kind of a one and done thing. The decreases that we had were just momentarily for fiscal year 2022. Next slide, Susan. Gas tax revenues, similar. You can see where fiscal year 20 was less than the fiscal year 19. And where fiscal year 21 saw a recovery. So you can see that we just lost that 1 year was fiscal year 2020. And we can see that fiscal year 22 is on track to exceed, it looks like, what we have in fiscal year 2021. And down below, there's a couple of notes that shows that the gas taxes increases about 2 cents in January of 2018, 20, and 22. So beginning January 22, revenue for January through June of this fiscal year should see a little bit of an increase because of the 2 cent increase. And if you take the 2 cent increase, that's statewide, it represents about almost a 5.5 to 6% increase in our revenues for the period that the tax is increased. Now, I do want to say this can be tempered with 2 things. One is vehicles becoming more fuel efficient, so they're not buying as much gas, and plus, the whole transition from gasoline-driven vehicles to electrical vehicles will have an impact on gas tax revenues as being kind of a more sustainable revenue source for the city going forward. So that's one of the things that we'll need to keep a lookout for, is those trends that will affect our gas tax revenues going forward. Building permits. you can see that fiscal year 21 was below fiscal year 18 and below fiscal year 19 and below fiscal year 20. So 2021 was a very hard hit year for the building permit fees, again, due to COVID-19. But if you take a look at the fiscal year 2022 year to date through October, we're exceeding the revenue trend that we had for 2020. And that's where the building official is anticipating an additional $1.5 million of building permit fees over what we had budgeted in fiscal year 2022. In fiscal year 2022, we were very conservative because we didn't know how fast we'd be coming out of the pandemic and the building permit activity would continue to increase. And again, this is taking a look at what we see in the development pipeline for especially things occurring down in South Cooper Mountain area, that the building official feels confident that we're going to have a much more robust building permit revenue stream this year than what we had adopted or planned to receive when we adopted this year's budget. Next slide. Water sales. This is interesting. So at least water sales has a very continuous increase depending on the fiscal year. So there was none of the inverse trends from one fiscal year to the other. It's a definite year-over-year increase in revenues. And that's due to basically three things. One is we have water rate increases. In 18 and 19, we only did a 10-cent increase. For fiscal year 20, we did a 40-cent increase. And I believe for fiscal year 21, we did 66 cents. And then for fiscal year 22, we did, I believe, another 66-cent increase in the water rate. And these are water rates that we have planned for over the next many fiscal years going forward as the city is building up its infrastructure in the South Cooper Mountain area. Also in core Beaverton with our Sexton Mountain water reservoirs and ASR well being rebuilt. And then the city joining the Willamette Water Supply Project to receive an additional 5 million gallons of water per day. It's a very expensive water, but it's water that we need for the future out into the 2040, 2050 range. And we needed to participate in the project, but it's very costly water for buying that 5 MGD capacity. And if we take a look at fiscal year 22 water sales, you can see that they're much more over the standard trend. And again, that was due to one, water consumption increases, mainly due to, I believe, temperatures as the temperatures were hotter for May and June, July and August, and even September. People used more water than normal that we have in a normal water year. So we are anticipating an increase in water sales. I believe it was about $700,000 that we put in additional water sales for this year. Knowing that, that this trend might not continue because we could have more of a temperate May and June coming up, where you have more rain coming during those months versus dry weather when people start irrigating. But it does show this graph does show a nice trend of water sales revenues continue to increase, which is what is needed to make our debt service payments going forward, and also for placing the water utility in line with the rate structure that it needs to have for the next 4 years as we incur more debt for building out the water infrastructure facilities, both in South Cooper Mountain and Beaverton core areas. This next one shows our actual water consumption. And you can see that in fiscal year 16, we had a little bit higher than normal compared to 17 and 18. And then in fiscal year 19, it looks like it grew quite a bit, but that's kind of self-inflated with the fact that by May of 2019, which is only 2 months before the fiscal year ends, we brought on an additional 4,000 customers from Tualatin Valley Water District. And so those water accounts as of as of April and May of 2019 were completely assimilated into the city of Beaverton. And so those accounts now started receiving consumption from the city of Beaverton, beginning with the months of May and June. And then it just is continuing for the fiscal year 2021 and 22. So there are some things that we have changing for the general fund. So one thing that I'm concerned about going forward is inflation. We have inflation, it says it's 5% here, but I believe now it's even gone up to, I've heard as much as 6.1% inflation. And that's going to drive cost impacts for the city of Beaverton. It's going to drive cost impacts for our labor. And it's going to drive cost impacts for materials and services, because as inflation occurs throughout the United States, when we procure goods and services and pay our employees, we're going to have to take into consideration inflation. Unfortunately, I think that a part of that is overinflated inflation, if that's a term, because of the supply and demand. I think that this inflation is kind of indicative of where we are with supply of materials. We do know that concrete, steel, construction materials have all supply is short, and so it's causing the inflation on the pricing to increase. So I think that the inflation is kind of being self-driven by our supply chain issues. I think it's also being self-driven by the stimulus packages that the federal government has released. So we had this large stimulus packet that came to the state governments for COVID-19 response. We have our own ARPA funding, $16 million that's given to the city for doing things that we might not necessarily have done had not received that, and that's just giving us additional resources to go out into the marketplace and procure things, or to build things, or to buy things, and that also is compounding inflation. And then with the recent infrastructure bill that was just passed, another $1 trillion that's going to trickle into the economy. Again, it's going to go for capital projects, which there's a pent-up demand for the materials already. So I think it's just going to self-drive inflation to a point where it's going to be challenging for some governments to deal with the inflation, as it puts pressures on our labor force and paying our labor force, and also for securing goods and materials, and especially in construction projects. Thankfully, we are kind of on the tail end of our PRCA and public safety building projects in our parking garage. Together, those were almost over $100 million worth of projects. But we still have our water infrastructure going out through fiscal year 2026. It's going to have quite a few of projects that we need to fund. That's going to be living in this inflationary world. Our PERS rate increase, as I mentioned to you, the PERS board established rates for this biennium, and this biennium is a 2-year period. This fiscal year is the first year of the biennium, and the fiscal year 22-23 is the second year. And the PERS increase just to the general fund was $680,000 to a $1.5 million increase that we need to fund out of its current existing obligation or current revenue stream. The third spoke on this is the loss of right-of-way. Our RW stands right-of-way fees on broadband services. And this is a lawsuit that we are currently in contention with Comcast. And Comcast has taken a look at what's called the FCC orders, and they have determined that according to their interests, they do not feel that they owe right-of-way fees on broadband services. And these broadband services are broadband services that are provided over their existing cable infrastructure. And their cable infrastructure is, back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and 90s was purely cable TV. And we're seeing a kind of a transition back from people using a lot of cable TV services, and now they're using more broadband services to provide those types of entertainment services that were traditionally held with cable TV. And so we're seeing that Comcast has determined that based upon their interpretation of the FCC ruling, that they do not owe right-of-way fees on broadband services. And so they discontinued paying those fees effective this September 30th of this year. So for the city's budget, we anticipated that $1.2 million worth of broadband revenue for right-of-way fees for use of the right-of-way fee for broadband. And they're going to pay the first quarter of that revenue for this year. So the net loss to the cities for this year is about $820,000. But the city needs to plan on losing this revenue going on in the future for fiscal year 22, 23, 23, 24, until our lawsuit goes through the court system to determine whether or not Comcast is right, that no, that they do not owe right-of-way fees on broadband services, or if the city believes it is correct that no, they do owe broadband right-of-way fees on the cable infrastructure network. The fourth item on this spoke is that we have a commitment to replace our development software. It's called the Development Review Process Software, and this is something the City Council has been brought along the way in many touch points. But it is at a pretty large cost. It's about $11 million over 10 years. And we have been using the general fund's resources to help pay for this. We're in this is our second year of implementation. And so we have another 8 years of this cost that we'll need to find a more stable revenue source other than the taxed general fund resources that we currently have. The next book on this wheel is the $14 million that the city borrowed for completing its civic projects. And the civic projects were about $7 million that we needed to fill the construction funding gap for the Public Safety Center building. Then we had additional resources for the Gateway project in front of the Public Safety building. We have the City Park fountain, and we had the central plant infrastructure upgrades. And that, although we borrowed the money, we have the money for the projects, the issue is that we need to repay the debt, and the debt needs to come from the city's general fund, its general taxing authority. So that's about another $775,000 worth of debt service that we have paid last year and this year, but we need to pay it for the additional 18 years going forward. That again, we need a dedicated funding source of the general fund to help support that debt service payment. Then along with building the new Public Safety Center, we have the cost of operating that building. And that building, this is our, we've had about basically a full year's worth of operating costs for the Public Safety Center building. It costs about $690,000 to operate that building, and that's a new cost that the city now has to provide a resource for now and in the future. And then we have our change of form of government. There's been estimates between $600,000 to $2 million. We took the more conservative side of $600,000 of additional costs for changing our form of government. This includes a city manager position, assistant city manager position, some staffing support for the mayor's office, and a potential future support staff for the city council. And so that's another kind of strain on the general fund to fund continuing costs of our form of government change.
Excuse me, Patrick?
Yes.
Councillor Hassan has a question.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, I can wait till we're done. I just
no, I in fact interrupt and ask questions during the process. That's the best process to do.
Oh, it's fine. It was more a question like from earlier, but it's okay. I'll just wait till you're done. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So if you have a question that's pertinent to a slide, just raise your hand, and it's best to answer that question as it's coming up. So these were some things that we need to plan for coming forward. So what do our fund balances look like for those funds that we knew that were kind of marginal for preparing for for this year's budget. So we're happy to report that the street fund had yes.
Renew, it looks like Member Kenneth has a question.
Yes.
Hi, Patrick. I have a quick question as far as revenue is concerned. So this year or fiscal year 21, we had a 16 million ARPA revenue income. So is there any other one-off income that we got in fiscal year 21?
No, there's not any other one-off types of revenues that we have received in fiscal year 21.
Thank you.
So for the street fund, it's looking a lot better. We were at 2.1 million when we proposed the budget. With what we're looking at as far as expenses and revised revenue projections, we believe it will be at 2.9 at 21%. So that's now turned into a positive outlook. The building fund, we had $800,000 as our fund balance at the end of this fiscal year. It's now going to be at 2.5 million. It's gone from 19% to 55%. So that's a positive change. And included in the supplemental budget are 2 additional positions that are recommended for the building fund. I think it's in building inspection and a permit, the permit counter, because of the work demands coming in for needing inspections and permit processing assistance. So this even includes adding 2 staffing members if the supplemental budget is passed, effective January 1st. The library is basically not changed. It's okay. It's neutral. It still is running a little bit low at 6.5%. We would like to have it at about 11%, but the library fund has kind of traditionally been around the 6 to 8% of contingency over the last couple of years. The transient lodging tax is no change. It's going to be neutral. In fact, one of the recommendations that if the PRCA, the Patricia Research Center for the Arts, does receive the additional $1.6 million worth of bond proceeds for civic projects now dedicated to the PRCA, that the TLT fund will now need to pick up that debt service expense. They'll actually need to reimburse the general fund about $200,000 for the debt service that we paid last year and the debt service that the general fund will pay this year. So that will be something that if the Budget Committee and the City Council does approve that use of that $1.6 million, that I will bring forward a transfer resolution to the City Council to then provide for that reimbursement to the general fund from the TLT fund. And so one of the things that we'll need to make sure is on the TLT fund is to take a look at the revenue forecasts for the remaining of the year, the operation costs for operating the PRCA, and make sure that we to see if we need to make any programmatic changes for the PRC operations, just based upon what we think that the transient lodging tax is going to produce in revenues going forward. And I do believe that the transient lodging taxes are now being paid for the Hyatt, the new Hyatt House building that's just right here, kitty corner to City Hall, and the 2 new hotels on Cornell. They have started paying the transient lodging taxes. So our revenue streams coming from those 3 hotels now starting to come in. Now the budget did anticipate that, so I think that my guess is that our TLT fund will probably be pretty much on target with revenues, even with these 3 new hotels coming on board, because we plan for those to come on board. It's just going to see how people are going to be traveling as the COVID-19 pandemic kind of marches on through the remainder of this fiscal year through May and June, and see how revenue trends look. And then on the, yes.
Chair Duggar has raised his hand.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Clair. Does the transient lodging tax, do we have the ability to apply that to Airbnb and sort of that whole class of facilities? I see a lot of those out. Thank you.
Yes, and in fact, Airbnb and all of the other online hotel operations, the county is our administrator of the transient lodging tax, not only for the city of Beaverton, but for all cities within Washington County and Washington County itself. In Washington County, I think they have almost 9 hotels in unincorporated area that they get the full tax for. And so they are our collection agency, and they monitor that very detailed as to Airbnb, our VRBOs, all the online booking agencies, and plus the direct hotel payments.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so for the water utility, we are at $9 million in contingency on the adopted budget. With our revised revenues coming forward and operations from last year coming forward, it's going to be at about 12.3 million. So going from 40% to 52% is a very positive change for our water utility. So when you take a look at the funds that are now kind of still struggling, library is maintaining neutral. Transient Lodging Tax is neutral, and I'll be taking a look at that over the next couple of months to make sure that it's coming on target. And if there's anything we need to do for the PRC's operations for the next fiscal year, that we'll be able to make those recommendations. So the only fund that really will be kind of under a struggle is the city's general fund. Okay, Susan, next slide.
Oops, sorry. Hold on. Got away from it. There we go. Sorry.
There we go. So this is kind of a recap of where we saw before. So we have on average on a budgetary basis, we deficit spend about 7.1 million. And right now we're at $9 million for the adopted budget in 12. Now the 12.4 is a little bit inflated again, because that now includes $1.6 million that we have designated as an expenditure of the general fund as a contribution towards the Patricia Research Center for the Arts. So some of the things that we could consider doing for both the adopted budget and for future budgets is the city general fund has traditionally given some of our funding sources to the street fund for overlays. And this is kind of a using of the right of way. So we collect fees for managing the right of way. And so we've contributed over the years funding for the overlay program. In more what I call lucrative years, that used to be at about $1 million a year. Then we reduced it to, I think, 900,000 and then 800,000. And the last couple of years is 600,000. But since the street fund is kind of recovering, it could be that we could eliminate a portion, all or none, of this $600,000 contribution that we make to the street fund in this year's adopted budget. Another area that we could do in kind of constraining or kind of tightening our belt, so to speak, is that we currently have about 30 vacancies within the city's general fund. And what we could do is we could take a look at taking a look at those 30 FTEs. Where are they? And could we put a hiring freeze or a temporary hold on actually replacing or filling those positions? And a conservative estimate would be a savings of about $1.9 million for this year if we were to do that. So that would be something that there's nothing that we would do as a budget committee, but it'd be the council giving the city manager direction to say, yes, we give you the authority to take a look at the staffing levels of the general fund. And if there are vacancies, do those vacant positions need to be filled? And if so, that would go through the city manager for the authority to recruit and rehire those vacant positions. That's one way to take a look at the, excuse me. That's one way to take a look at the current year, maybe trying to conserve our resources for and redo some of our expenditures. Okay, Susan, that next screen. So some of the things that we could also consider for the future is we could eliminate transfers that the general fund has done to CIP transportation projects. This is mainly some sidewalk improvement project the general fund has participated in those over the years. And the amount in the supplemental budget is $506,000. Right? And I'd say within the adopted budget and amended for the supplemental is about $506,000. So going forward, that could be something that we could curtail using the general fund for transportation projects. We could eliminate future transfers for civic projects. And although it's $2.6 million here, really 1.6 million of that is now going to the Patricia Research Center for the Arts. But that means that this year's budget had $1 million for other civic projects to complete those projects. Those are mainly the city park fountain and the city plaza expansion project over at the public safety building. So that's some of the things that we could do to curtail the general fund's contributions towards other civic projects going in the future. And again, whether or not we wanted to eliminate in the future the transfer of funding to the street fund for overlays. And again, these would be considerations that we would do in deliberating and presenting to you the fiscal year 22-23 budget.
Hey, Patrick, Councillor Sansucci has a question.
Could we go back to the previous slide for just a moment?
Yes. If it will register.
Sometimes they behave.
Sometimes they don't.
Now my screen is grayed out. Let me,
there you go.
There we go. Okay. So, you know, I realize there's a whole lot of conversations ahead of us before any of this becomes actionable. I just wanted to lob one pair of comments in here because when I was going through this presentation in advance of the meeting, this slide kind of jumped out at me. One of the considerations, you know, for the benefit of budget committee members, the transfers to CIP transportation projects, Mr. O'Clair mentioned that some of them are sidewalk projects. That's coming from the funds that we set aside from right-of-way fees. And one of the principles that we established when we did the set aside of those right-of-way fees was that those monies mostly, not entirely, should be spent on right-of-way projects. And one of the right-of-way project categories that has very few other sources of funding available is sidewalk projects. So I think there's going to be some conversation in the future about whether we want to do that particular adjustment or not. The other one is the civic projects, and I think that the issue there is the same thing. There are many things that are being lumped there under civic projects that probably need to be untangled so that we know exactly what we're talking about. But many of those are things that have no other funding source other than potentially general fund sources. So I think that, you know, between staff, city council, and next year's budget, we're going to have a bunch of conversations about those things. So I'm not sure that this is an automatic. I think we've got a lot more to talk about there.
Yes, Councilor Sansucci, I totally agree with you that needs to have a good conversation. In fact, what I'd recommend is if someone to direct me to say, Mr. O'Clair, could you prepare kind of like maybe a 3-year look back on all of the funding that the general fund has made to be a transportation project, civic projects, or street fund overlays over a period of years now, kind of give us a benchmark as to what we're looking at. But I do agree that these are civic projects that there's no other funding source other than borrowing money. And when you borrow money, I always say that, well, it's great to borrow, but you always have to have the ability to repay.
So I'd be happy to offer the suggestion that maybe we ask you to do that. So.
Okay, so I'll consider that done. So I will prepare that, and then probably I will transmit that through the city manager's office to you and kind of give you a backwards look. And like for the civic projects this year, part of that $2.6 million, I believe, was Councilor Sansucci will know right away. It was either $300,000 or $500,000 for the EV electrical vehicle charging stations at the public. $3 billion, yeah, 300,000. So it's projects like that you know they don't have any other funding source, and so it has to rely on just the general taxing and revenue sources of the general fund to fund those types of projects. Other than that, you could borrow monies to build them, but then, like we say, you have to then repay the debt over a 20-year period.
Chair Duggar raised his hand.
Thanks, Susan. Mr. O'Clair, looking back at the budget, there's a noticeable drop from say around 2018 to current adopted in the general fund for court fees. And I don't know what's going on there, like if that's expected to come back. Second question, I believe in the supplemental projects, I saw that the police have requested additional equipment for traffic control, like radar. Is that anticipated to increase revenue? You would think that it would, and I think there's budgeted somewhere around $300,000-400,000 if I remember correctly.
So I'll need to take a look at the radar. I don't believe that there's anything specifically on radar. We did purchase through a grant a new speed trailer. In fact, it's been deployed on Byros Road because I drive it every day, and it's a really nice new sign. It's of a speed trailer. But as far as additional radar equipment, I don't think that I've seen that. But Mr. Chair, if you maybe you and I can have a side conversation.
No, I think I'm remembering the trailer. I think that might be it.
Okay.
I was thinking it was like one of those van kind of things. So maybe if that doesn't affect revenue, then disregard that question.
Yes, so the vans do affect revenue, and we have seen during COVID-19, traffic citations drastically drop because people were not driving. And if you're not driving, there's the infraction traffic just really goes down. And so we did see that, and it was almost an immediate impact starting in March of 2020. We are seeing an uptick in that, and I can share with the city council, and I'll send it to the city manager's office. I keep track of the various tranches of what I call fines, and when I talk about fines, it's not the fact that a ticket was issued, it's the fact that a ticket was paid, because that's the only way that the fine revenue gets recorded, is if a person pays their fine. And what I've done is over the years, I've tracked it from in total for all fines and forfeitures for running the court. And then it breaks it down into what we call officer initiated citations. We have the photo radar vans, we have the speed through green, and we have one other tranche of revenues that you can definitely see a pattern starting with the COVID-19 reducing. One thing also that impacted the general fund court revenues, and I'll have to go back into the record to get the exact date, was that in one legislative year, the state legislature changed what's called the presumptive fine amount, and our classifications or our fines are issued in 4 classes of citations: violation A, B, C, and D. A being the highest. Those are usually DUI type offenses, D being the lowest. And before, they used to have a range that could be established, that's set by the state, and the city could do the minimum, or they can do midpoint, or they can do the maximum, or anywhere in between. And Beaverton had always done the maximum presumptive fines available. And what the state did is said, let's make this uniform across the state. And they said, we are going to set the maximum fine for every class violation. You can't go above it. And that was about 25% less than what we were currently levying as our maximum fine. So we had a big reduction in the revenues due to that. But I think I want to say it was even before 2018 that occurred. But the schedules that I can prepare for you would definitely show that, because you could see a drastic reduction in the amount of revenues for all classes of citations and all classes of officer initiated photo vans, right turn on red, straight through green, and then running red lights. But we are seeing a comeback of citations. Also during the pandemic, the court did not turn anybody over to collection. We thought it would be kind of a bad form during the pandemic to turn non-pay or failure to pay citations over to collection agency during the pandemic. So we kind of had about a 16-month stop of doing that. And so the court has just recently, within the last couple of months, started process of contacting those people that had not paid and give them a kind of a new date to start fresh. Hey, you need to come in compliance with your citation either present us with information that says it wasn't you, or see the judge to get to explain your circumstance. And then if you don't comply by that date, then it will start to send you to collection. And so not only did we have a reduction in citation just from pure driving, being less people on the road, we had a conscious decision to not put people through a collection process.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we have a couple questions. Mayor Beatty.
Well, it seems out of place after that question. I was going to go after Mark a little bit. I want to be careful that we're not directing the budget committee to be doing work that the city council should be doing. And some of those nuanced questions of how money is split around is really a city council and city manager discussion. And I know we have this, I say this a lot during the budget committee, but I want to make sure that we're keeping the right groups in the right place and doing the work at whatever board it's supposed to be appropriate at.
Thank you, Mayor. That's a good point.
I believe member Kamath was next.
Patrick, quick question on these charging stations. Are they just a public service, or is there any significant income generating potential there?
I do not believe they're going to be income generating potential. I believe that it's for putting me at what's called the Beaverton building, which is a building I'm located in here, and at the new public safety center for our eventual replacement of our fleet to electrical charging vehicles so that we can have charging stations for our own fleet. Now that was my original thought of when we started down this process. And then the best person to answer that question would be Mr. Keller. And I do know that he has responded to a question that Councilor Sansuzi had in his information request. And I don't know if it answered that particular question.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions out there, Susan, that you saw?
No.
Okay. So one of the things now, this is just totally considerations, and this would be at the for our deliberation of what the city manager would like to present, and in accordance with what the council directs, is that we do have these ongoing expenses of the city's general fund that have been incurred at least last fiscal year, if not also in this fiscal year and going in the future. And I just kind of put a thought out there that if you were to convert this expense need into what would take in a property tax millage rate to generate that type of level to cover that expense, this is what we would need for the three things that we know that are ongoing expenses of the city's general fund that are new. And that's the Civic Project Bonded Debt Service. That's about $877,000 a year. It would take a property tax rate increase of about 8.3 cents to provide the resources to meet that obligation. Our change in government costs at $600,000 would begin property tax 5.7 cents. And then public safety building, that continuing operation of our new building of $690,000 would be additional 6.5 cents.
And Mayor Beatty has a question.
Yes.
I just want to be clear on what you're asking. Are we being asked to raise property taxes 20 cents?
No, so this is just a consideration as to how the general fund is going to provide resources to meet its obligations for fiscal year 22-23. So this is purely conjecture. It's purely an option. There could be other things that could mitigate this where we wouldn't need to do this, but this is just kind of putting it down. There's not a lot of new revenue sources for the city's general fund. It's property taxes and right-of-way fees are the largest drivers of revenues for the general fund.
And remind me, we have 33 cents left in our
about 39 cents.
So this would be nearly half of what we have left in our ability to raise property taxes in forever until we do a bond.
Correct.
Or then we would have to do a bond. That's quite a hefty ask.
And I'm not asking. This is just how's the general fund going to get resources to meet these ongoing obligations? Some of the things that could be a consideration by the city council is we have our American Rescue and Recovery Act funds for tranche 2, whether or not we wanted to completely make whole the city's funding revenue losses for the general fund, an additional $1.7 million. And then if we want to just build up our general fund reserves using the tranche 2 funding of $2.5 million. This is just purely an option that could be available to the city council. And this decision does rely totally with the city council as to how we want to use our tranche 2 recovery funds. So the next part of our presentation, we can take a look at answering any additional questions or thoughts that we've made from the materials that have been presented. There's also additional schedules that we can review, and I can bring them up that were under tabs 2 and 3 of your budget document. That's the prior year financial results review, or current revenue trends, which we've already reviewed quite a few of them in the PowerPoint presentation, but there could be some other schedules that you may like to go over them, and I can definitely give the Budget Committee and the City Council a review of those activities in both the prior year financials tab and the general, the current year financials information tabs.
Member Zatsmary has a question.
Yes.
I have a quick question, probably a silly question, but I have to ask it since today I'm in Phoenix amid the water wars here. When you charge out for water, are there different tiers that you charge out? For example, do you charge more for drinking water versus water that would be undrinkable that you use for irrigation? Or do you have any tiers in water usage?
Yes, so I can answer that. So under our current water usage, and right now it's all potable water, meaning it's drinking water. It's all at one rate. So we don't have any tiered rates for low consumers, high consumers. Some of the jurisdictions around us charge for a certain amount up to, let's say, 8 CCF, and then anything from 8 to 20 is at a higher rate. Beaverton has just been a flat rate for all consumption tiers, for all consumption. And Mr. Satsmary, with regard to your potable and non-potable, we have a current construction project called the Purple Pipe. And if you've been watching the City Council, you've seen a lot of discussion about bringing forward this Purple Pipe concept. And it is using non-potable water for providing irrigation to areas in South Cooper Mountain, where you have greenfield development that can put in this new infrastructure, because the piping needs to be separate, and that's why I call it purple pipe, because the pipe is actually purple, meaning this is water that should not be consumed. It should be used for irrigation. And so the idea is that water would be at a lower price point because you're not treating it, and you're not having to pump it from the water reservoirs through the treatment plant, treating it, pumping it to Beaverton and up to all the various elevations for in storage to get it to the consumer. It would be more of a localized process where we have an old, what's called an ASR well number 3, which is down the corner of Barrows Road and Loon Drive. It's an old what we call an aquifer storage and recovery well that we thought we were going to use for drinking water. It really didn't produce much value for drinking water, but we think that it could be used for this Purple Pipe project. And the idea is that we would take water during the winter months and runoff water, inject it, treat it, inject it into the aquifer, and then during the summer, pull it out for irrigation. And theoretically, there would be a lower price point than our potable water. But that infrastructure is still being built, and we're still modeling what rate that would be. Right now, if a person is using the Purple Pipe system, it still has potable water going through it, so it's going to be charged at the potable water rate. So until we create the new water source and get it all working and have that then provide the Purple Pipe water for irrigation, it'll remain at the current potable water consumption rate.
in the cities that do have this variable, these variable charges, for example, anything over 8 CCFs and so on that you mentioned, do they generate more revenue for their water usage or not?
That would be hard to compare. We could probably say, we could probably take a sample of residential consumption, because basically most of our consumption is residential for Beaverton. And we could maybe do some analysis of saying, on average, here's 30 customers in Beaverton, randomly selected. Here's their consumption for a year. Here's what we generated in that year at one rate. If we build it under your system, what would it have produced in water revenue?
If I could also just interject quickly. So a lot of the cities use tiered rates as part of their conservation planning with the state of Oregon. And so it acts as a price point for people to curtail and shave off the peak water for irrigation. So it can operate as a deterrent to using more water, which would then act as a depressant on their revenues. And Councillor Hassan had a question.
It was more, I wanted to wait until Mr. Leclerc was done with this presentation, if you're done.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could just maybe ask the committee if anybody had a question on, if you're to open your budget book if you're using a digital format, to what we call the prior financial statements narrative schedule, see if there's anything that the budget committee members would like me to review of any of those 6 schedules that are presented there. A lot of that has been recast in the PowerPoint presentation. And not seeing anything. And Susan, do you see any questions being asked?
I do not.
So then likewise, under what we call the current year financial information, there's some various schedules. Again, we talked a lot about them during the presentation. There were some, such as handout 2, that we did not talk about, but all that does is say that we are pretty close in estimating our property tax revenues coming in. We are about 200 and some odd $1,000 off of our projections in total, over $47 million projection for property taxes, $264,000. And I don't think that's going to be very material to the city. Just to explain, when we levy an amount for property taxes, we assume that we're going to receive about 95% of that. One of them is that if you're like me, when you paid your property taxes, hopefully before today, it's November 15th, that you took advantage of the 3% discount. So that 5% reduction of what we levy takes into consideration that 3% discount that some property taxpayers use or take advantage of. And then also about 2% for delinquencies. And 5%, when you take a look at 5%, it's a little bit high. Of course, we're very conservative, so that we can make up this $264,000 kind of like reduction in property tax revenues that will actually receive that based on we're budgeting 5% less than what we had levied, and we should probably be getting more like about 3.5% to 4% less instead of 5%. So if there's any other questions on any of those handouts, I know that we talked about debt service of the city's water utility is doing fine. The PERS reserve fund balances are doing fine. In fact, on the PERS reserve schedule, if you're to look at that on your book on, I think it's going to be handout 11 in your book, there was a column in there that we were planned to spend about, use about $665,000 of the general fund's PERS reserves for helping us meet that obligation for this year. And we also had some funding from the street fund and the building fund. Well, with the building fund and the street fund revenues improving, I don't think we'll need to do that transfer. So when we actually close out this year's books, we probably will not record that transfer coming into the street fund and the building fund. We'll leave their PERS reserves in total intact as though that the transfer will not occur.
So I'm going to jump in and just say kind of a couple of thoughts that I had as I was reviewing this. So first of all, thank you. This was a very thorough review of everything. There was something that you were saying at the beginning, kind of addressing some of Councillor Sansucci's questions around, I think questions around how detailed we get in. And for folks who are newer, we transitioned into this new form of government. It's a council manager form of government. And as such, the city manager is now the administrative head of the city, helping make the financial decisions and budgetary decisions informed by the budget committee and by the council. And so I love this detail, and I'm sure this will be potentially a work session for us as council to discuss. I would like to move in a direction that allows us to direct more policy focused questions and less line item by line item questions. I respect that that's something of the past, but I think it was also a form of maybe a government we were in, or the people that sat at the table. And my hope and desire is that as this evolves, that we're able to do just to zoom out and really think more big picture around what our policies are around budget, and really trusting a city manager that we've hired, along with excellent staff that we have to help really direct more of the day-to-day. And so I'm still a little sick, if you can hear it, and I really hesitated, but I wanted to be here because I think it's important that we start thinking about that. And I'd really like to ask maybe my fellow counselors to chime in on, how you feel about this. And then what are the things that we need to be deciding on sooner rather than later, and what does this look like in the future? And then what are the things we want our budget committee members who are here giving their time on a Monday night that we also want to make sure that we weigh in on and hear from. So that's a lot that I said, but I did want to make sure we said it. I said it because I worry about getting really into some of the details. I think this is really great work. Patrick, thank you so much. But I also want us to take a step back and just think about how we can make an influence and an impact in the way that I hope that we want to. And I'll stop because I see Councillor Sansucci has typed in the chat. So, thank you.
So it's funny that you brought that up, because one of the notes that I made to myself here after listening to Mr. Auclair's presentations is that, and this is a recommendation to our city manager, is that perhaps we should look at having a general discussion with the city council about these sort of top level budget options that are being sort of telegraphed to us tonight, but that we need to dig into a little bit more as to how we address budgetary shortfalls, how we plan out longer term budgetary futures. Previously, we sometimes did a little bit of that. It may be a good idea for us to figure out a way to sort of institutionalize inserting council top level budgetary direction into the early stages of budget development. I think that would be a useful thing. Now, having said that, I personally don't think it would be a great idea to take away the visibility of the line items in the budget, because sometimes there are some intriguing surprises in there that reveal larger issues. And because the budget committee only has to deal with all of that detail twice a year, we're not talking about a monthly review of a ton of data. We're talking about one big rendezvous with a really big book in May, and then this rendezvous with a significantly smaller amount of detail here in November. So personally, my recommendation would be to not drop the detail, but we certainly want to take a look at that top level stuff. I agree.
Mayor Beatty?
What do you think that pounding on the door?
Stacey, you're muted.
She's
I
muted
haven't
and it
done
sounds
that.
like the
Perfect.
attorney is not.
Yeah. I would just say I'm more in line with what Councillor Hassan is saying, and I think this is definitely a future conversation for the city council, and just putting it in people's brains that maybe we should look at an every 2-year budget with an annual supplemental budget where we could still get the details that we want, but we're not doing this every 6 months. And you know, I don't need to know that $291 was moved in the emergency management program. I'd rather spend our time talking about if we're going to eat through half of our ability to tax in the future. Like, that's where, you know, where I need to show up and have that conversation about what that looks like, not this level of detail, which existed in the old form of government because the council needed to have complete oversight of the budget to make sure that the city manager / mayor and the same person didn't run away with the budget. So I think there's probably a way to do both. And I think we need Jenny to give us some solid recommendations. But I think about the council's not really able to use and influence the budget in a way because of elections and how we set goals and when we're setting them. I mean, they're already going to start talking about next year's budget and we're not even set to do our council priorities. And if it was an election year, we wouldn't be doing them until January. So if we're trying to influence the budget with council recommendations, like Councillor Santucci said, we need to zoom out a lot and think about how we're going to do this budget. But we're in it now. So I guess we can go through it and hear all about the line items. But, you know, I think about, we got to keep the main thing the main thing. We need policymakers doing policy level stuff, and this detracts from our ability to do that.
I don't
And
see
then
any other chats. Sorry. Oh, Chair Duggar has his hand up.
Yeah, I was from a budget committee member perspective, I completely agree with the counselors, and I know that's their decision, but it's a really hard balance. I like getting in the detail. I like doing my homework. Some of it gets really complicated, and I just, you know, because we don't want to make policy decisions. We want to validate the numbers, and just getting too much detail makes that really hard to do sometimes, especially the way the budget flows. And I'm a veteran now. I've done this. This is my 3rd year. But just looking at all the items for that we'll be discussing, the transmittal memo, right? Like, all the funds are all bounced around. Like, it goes from police to transportation to this to that, and I'm just like, I don't, you know, like, I can't. It's really hard for me from a citizen, from a resident perspective, to understand how those numbers impact the bigger picture and the overall thing when it's conducted that way. So. I completely agree with the counselors, and I would support them taking a look at this and advising us. Thank you.
Councillor Mitchell has her hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's a good balance. I really appreciate the detail in the budget, and would hate to lose it, because I pop that open all the time. And even, I know I pop it open as a counselor, but when I was on the budget committee, just as a resident, it was awesome. It was awesome to see that level of detail, because to me, it spoke about accountability. However, I think that maybe our presentations could be buttoned up a little bit. And I think that's, you know, probably what is pretty taxing. I mean, as a committee member, you can take in as little or as much as you want, you know, and I know there's a ton, but I would rather have there be too much detail, because again, it speaks to accountability versus lack of detail, because then it's impossible to get those numbers, to get it in a timely fashion. And I just feel like it can really slip away. And as far as biannual or annual review, I could go either way. You know, I think I'd want to hear more about the biannual and what that looks like, because, you know, I think about our supplemental budget meetings, and they always seem so impactful. I would hate to have time go past that was longer or greater, or having, you know, double the budget, because now we're looking at, you know, 2 years instead of 1. So, but I'm open to hearing it. So, you know, we could talk it through more at a city council meeting.
Member Zatzmary.
Yeah, this wouldn't be for a discussion or decision by any means for the budget committee, but it might be useful since there are very few FTE positions, new FTE positions in this supplemental budget, to list the positions that couldn't be funded. Now, how many people have come forward with new positions versus the positions that have been funded? Patrick mentioned a couple of positions that had been funded, but I don't have a clue from the outside of how many other positions were suggested and because of budgetary duress couldn't be funded.
And Mr. Chair, I could answer that question. So, Mr. Satzmer, usually during the supplemental budget, it's very, other than the need for the building fund to have staffing, new staffing members proposed in the supplemental budget, because we just adopted the budget in June for July with all the new positions in there. And so what's changed in the last 3 months that would drive a new position? So a new position request through the supplemental budget happens very rarely. It happened this year just because of the building fund boom, when we thought that we were in a building fund lax and we didn't hire staff or replace staff. So that's probably the only thing that I can mention as far as the new positions for the supplemental budget. And then I did want to just kind of give from my perspective. I worked at cities in Washington, 2 cities in Washington, and the city manager had an administrative budgetary authority to do changes to the adopted budget that were administrative, that were within the budgetary compliance laws, that weren't adding to the total appropriations, but it's just moving funding around from one either program within the general fund to another one, or within a council of a program. Whereas this document here includes all of that detail. So that's one of the things that I'm used to, and I'm sure that Jenny is also used to, being a city manager, of having that administrative control. And those are things that we would bring forward to you, hopefully in a work session, to discuss that, of how you'd like to proceed. And as far as preparing the actual budget document for 22-23, you're going to get the exact same detail that you've always received. You're going to get the full Monty. So nothing of that would be reduced. It would just be the supplemental budgets that we do, one in November for this one here, and the one in May, that could be reduced because there could be some administrative things that you would allow the city manager to conduct behind the scenes without having to come to council or to the budget committee for blessing of moving $200 from this account to this account. That's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Now, is it the supplemental budget transmittal memorandum? Is that the part?
Yes, so we're at the point where you can conduct it, and let me make sure that there's no other questions about any of the materials that we presented on the financials information. Then you are free to start conducting the chair of the supplemental budget using the Transmittal Memorandum, and that's at the first tab. And what we've done in the past, Mr. Chair, if it's how you'd like to proceed, is you just go page by page to see if there's any questions on each page of the transmittal memo. And as you mentioned before we started the meeting, that review stops at page
31.
30, I believe.
30.
Yeah, 30. So we have two different budget numbers. We have page number 31, it's at the bottom. But if you take a look at the top, it's page 29 of the transmittal memo. So yes, page 31 of the complete document would be the last page to review. And then just to mention what does this Exhibit A do? And this is a great suggestion by Councilor Sansuzi. Is he was interested to know, can you just give me a listing of all of the supplemental budget requests that need more appropriation from contingency? And that's what that recap does on pages beginning on page 32 through the end of the document. So that's one of the good things that Councilor Sansuzi suggested, that is a great tool for the budget committee to have. That what are the requests that are just really asking for additional appropriation authority? Okay, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, and just to clarify, members, when I say page number, I'm looking at the bottom number, the bottom of the page. So I'm going to start on page 6. At the top it says page 4, but we'll just go with the page 6. So again, we'll if there are any questions on this page, let me know. I'll pause for a couple seconds. Susan, if you could just kind of let me know if you see any hands or.
Yep.
Okay, going on to the next page, page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. Page 13. Page 14. And 15.
I just have a comment, not a question, for council. I know that there's some council money, and I'd like to make sure at some point we just discuss that in the future. The request, I think 3554, 3569, 3570. I know we're in a new form of government, but I don't know that we've ever really discussed as a team what it looks like to, use funds, which is why I think there's carryover. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other comments for page 15? Page 16. Page 17. Page 18. Page 19. Page 20. Page 21. Actually, I had a question here, Patrick, for 3673 and 3674. It says Open Air Beaverton Structure Design Grant and then Open Air Beaverton Structures Grant. Is that for the reimbursement program for business, or is that for the First Street Dining Commons?
Mr. Chair, that's a question I might not be able to answer tonight. And I don't know if Community Development Director Cheryl Tweedy is on the line. I see her. There she is right there.
Yeah. Good evening. Excuse me, Chair Duggar. Could you repeat the request numbers for me, please?
Sure. It's 3673 and 3674. It's 180,000 combined for design and structure grants. And I didn't know if that was for the public portion of the First Street Dining Commons. I know that the city's taken over that, or if that is the reimbursement program to help small businesses.
I'm sorry, what was the number again? 36 what?
3673 and 3674.
Got it. Okay.
$180,000 combined.
Yes, thank you, Cheryl Tweedy, Community Development Director. I apologize for losing track of things here. Both of these items are for design of improvements to support local businesses. So there would be a design expense to help with engineering and potentially some architectural services, as well as grants that would be made available to local businesses. The grant program is in the process of being established at this point in time, and it will be implemented in the next couple of months.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions for page 21 before we move forward? Okay. Page 22. Page 23. 24, 25, 26, 27, 28.
There's a hand up. Counselor
Okay.
Sansucci.
Yeah, quickly, I want to thank our finance director and our city manager and everybody else involved for answering all the questions that I submitted in advance. So I don't have very many going through here. But the answer to one of the questions relates to an item on this page at the very bottom of the page, request number 3745, which is the professional services for consultant services to provide independent review of police department policies. The answer to the question that I asked about that said that the scope of work is going to be developed by the city manager and the chief of police. Just a general comment, I don't disagree with that, except that I think that you're going to want to have council feedback or input into that scope of work as well.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other comments on page 28?
I'll just
Page
chime in.
20.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, please.
I do want to kind of give the signal that I would agree with Councillor Sansucci, just making sure that we have a sense of what that's going for, because I know we've been having a lot of conversations, so making sure we're able to weigh in on that.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other comments before we move forward? Okay, page 29. Page 30. And page 31. I believe that completes the transmittal memorandum. Mr. O'Clair, do we entertain a motion now to approve the budget?
Yes, so it would be could be in two steps. One is to approve the supplemental budget as submitted. It'll be moved and seconded, and then it'll call for discussion. And then at that point, you'll see if there's any proposed amendments to add or subtract to the supplemental budget. And if not, then you'll just have discussion on the main motion as moved and seconded, and then call for a vote.
Thank you. I will entertain a motion to approve supplemental budget S22-1 as submitted.
So moved.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a second.
I second.
Thank you, Huey. We will now open the floor for discussions and any proposed amendments. I'll give everyone a second to think about this. And Susan, keep me honest if I don't see anyone.
Correct. I don't see anyone.
Okay. It does not appear there are proposed amendments. So we will call for a vote on a supplemental budget 22-1. Susan, would you call roll, please?
Yes. Councillor Fagan. Councillor Hartmeyer-Prigg.
Yes.
Councillor Hassan.
Yes.
Councillor Mitchell.
Yes.
Councillor Sansucci.
Yes.
Councillor Tibnon.
Yes.
Member Burton.
Yes.
Member Duggar.
Yes.
Member Huon.
Yes.
Member Kamath.
Yes.
Member Maldonado. Member Zatzmary.
And
I don't think I vote.
that's correct.
Oh, sorry. So thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Mayor Beatty.
Yes.
And what's the tally? Was that
That would
unanimous?
be, yes, unanimous. Thank you.
Okay. The motion is carried. So I believe now, Mr. O'Clair, we forward this over to the City Council. Is that
Yes,
correct?
so yeah, Madam Mayor will convene the City Council, and we'll be at the tab that says Agenda Bill.
tab that says agenda bill.
In your budget document.
Okay. All right, I'm going to open tonight's meeting of the City Council. Do we need to call the roll again?
Probably just for the record, Mayor, it'd be great to call the roll.
Okay.
Counselor Fagan. Counselor Hartmeyer Prigg.
Present.
Counselor Hassan.
Here.
Counselor Mitchell.
Here.
Counselor Sansucci.
Here.
Counselor Tibnan.
Here.
Did you get that, Susan?
Yes.
And then Mayor Beatty.
And Mayor, I'm sorry, Mayor Beatty.
Still here.
Yes, we are.
I'm not the city recorder, obviously.
Yes. And for the record, Counselor Fagan is not joining us because I don't think you called his name. Okay, so I want to open up a public hearing to talk about tonight's supplemental budget. Is anyone from the audience wishing to address the City Council tonight?
I don't see any hands raised from the attendees.
No one is rushing to give us public feedback on this. So I'm going to close the public hearing on tonight's budget and ask if the City Council would like to make a motion to approve tonight's supplemental budget.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve agenda item number 21277, resolution number 4759, a resolution adopting a supplemental budget S-22-1 for the fiscal year commencing July 1, 2021, and making appropriations therefrom.
Been moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded by Councilor Hartmeyer Prigg. Any discussion on the motion?
I have
Councilor Hassan.
Okay. I just one general comment, and I was trying to remember of anything from the last discussion that like maybe got missed or that we left behind. And I remember there was conversation around some sort of equity officer, equity work. I acknowledge that we're in a dire situation with our funds, and that's not something that we're able to potentially allocate funds to. But I hope that we continue to look at everything with an equity lens as we allocate how these funds are used, because it's really important that we're supporting our communities, all of them. That's it. Thanks.
Councilor Sansucci.
Yeah, just a quick response to that. I think that's a great topic for us to bring up in the context of our council retreat, to have a discussion with the city manager about how to kind of get some visibility into what equity work is already going on in the city, and how successful that has been to date, so that we can figure out what, if anything, needs to be done more. I think there's been a lot of work going on internally and some externally as well, but I'm not sure we have as much visibility of that as we might want to have. And then the last thing that I'm going to say, which is just a lighthearted comment, is that I love a resolution that can include the word "therefrom."
In my lighthearted comments, councilors better bring their sleeping bags to City Hall for our council retreat, because you guys just keep adding and adding. So buckle up. We're going to be hanging out there for 3 days. Any other discussion on the motion this evening? All right, well, let's get a roll.
Counselor Fagan, excused. Counselor Hartmeyer Prigg.
Yes.
Counselor Hassan.
Yes.
Counselor Mitchell.
Yes.
Counselor Sansucci.
Yes.
Counselor Tibnan.
Yes.
Mayor Beatty.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. Well, I think with that, I want to thank the Budget Committee members for their free labor tonight. Make sure you send the bill to City Council. We'll gladly pay it. And I'm sad that you don't get the best meal of the year. Generally speaking, City Council or Budget Committee has the best meal of the year. So Patrick, my expectation would be that you Uber Eats everyone in May some meals. That way they can at least make it, worth it for them.
And then, Madam
Okay.
Mayor, if you want to formally adjourn the City Council meeting, turn it back over to the chair, and he will ask if there's any closing comments on the Budget Committee meeting, and then adjourn Budget Committee.
Yep, he's already unmuted for that. I turn it over to you, Mr. Duggar.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councilors. Members, is there any other business before the Budget Committee we should address? Pause. just for me, is this anyone other than Tiffany's last meeting? Am I missing anyone?
No, I think that
anyone else?
is correct. So Tiffany, I just wanted to thank you for your service.
Yeah.
And that hopefully our paths will pass again sometime in the future.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you so much from the people of Beaverton. I think that's it. Then we are adjourned. Thank you so much to the staff and for everyone for showing up.
Good
Good
night,
night,
everybody.
everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Thank you.